Hello friends, welcome to another episode of US 3410. Happy to be back in class with you. This week we're going to be talking about interviewing. Actually this week and next week we'll be talking about interviewing. We're going to be looking at some videos with some of my favorite recruiters in town. We have two friends coming from UNM, Lauren Schiller and Bree McCurdy, and then three other guests who are from three different organizations. CJ Evans from Tennessee Valley Federal Credit Union, Patton Jennings from Bellhops, and Catherine Gartrell, who oversees the internships at Mohawk. And they're going to be talking to us about their advice around interviewing and their experiences leading thousands of interviews. This is going to be a really cerebral class. You are going to need to have your course reader with you. We're going to be completing the 20 Common Interview Questions worksheet. And so you'll want to open it to that page, and you're going to have a pencil ready so that you can as we go through, answer the questions that we are bringing up in class, okay? Before we get to these individual questions, however, I want to take a moment to ask you to clear your mind of distractions and allow yourself to focus on yourself for the next 50 minutes. If you do, you'll be further down the road to the preparation for interviews than most entry-level candidates are. Believe it or not, people take 30 minutes or less to prepare for an interview. It's kind of mind-boggling, but this will not be everyone in this class, however. By the end of this class, I want you to have a fair understanding of how to draw out information about interview processes from recruiters and begin preparing for the most commonly asked questions so that you can present your experiences in the best of light. Many people think that interviewing is stressful, as in one of the most painful activities in life. And I understand your livelihood and your future is on the line, and rejection in any form just stinks. But I want to help you feel at ease with the idea of interviewing and make you feel prepared to step into an interview room with confidence. Before I dive too deep into the content, I want to share some pre-interview advice, because the first step to be as confident as possible is to be as informed as possible prior to the event. Knowing what to expect can help alleviate a great deal of stress. So let's start here. When you get an interview request, your first instinct might be to thank them and get them off the phone as quickly as possible before they change their minds. But take the time to grab a pen and have a conversation to gather some key information. What do I mean by this? Well, these questions are a great place to start. Sometimes you're going to get all of these questions answered, and sometimes you will get no answers, but you should always try. So first off, don't come off as obnoxious or anxious or demanding with these questions. Ask them as nonchalantly as your personality will allow. Okay, so first you want to say, thank you, I look forward to it, what can I expect from the interview? And sometimes this singular question can get the recruiter to divulge everything else. So start there. If only a tidbit is revealed, go ahead into the deeper waters and ask, how long can I expect to spend with you, just so I can plan my day accordingly? This sends a message of an ordered mind, so that's a plus. But if the recruiter was tight-lipped, your start time is 9 a.m., and she answers to plan until 3 p.m., well, that answers a lot, right? You know that there's going to be a lunch session and numerous interview sessions. It also lets you know that if they let you go at 10 a.m., there was probably an issue. And finally, you can ask the question, I'm very excited to meet the team. Can you tell me with whom I'll be meeting? If they give names, awesome. Now you have some Googling to do. If they have job titles, that's fine too. You can develop some talking points that might entice folks who fill very specific roles. And also you will know how many resumes to bring along. I also want to share the types of interviews you might be invited to participate in. Interviews are often traditional one-on-one situations, but employers are taking advantage of technology during the job selection process and also adopting varied interviewing processes that you should anticipate. Employers often start with a phone interview to determine whether or not they would like to schedule a second interview. In your course reader, you will find some tips about preparing for a phone interview, which includes turning off your notifications on your phone, using a pen to take notes instead of a keyboard to avoid adding noise to the conversation. This is a very common first stage, so please look through that document carefully so that you're prepared for your phone interviews. Secondly, video interviews are increasingly popular. It's a cost-effective way to narrow down a field of candidates, and some companies are using Skype or Zoom to conduct interviews without having to pay for travel to bring several candidates to their office, and some companies are using pre-recorded online interviews, which requires candidates to log onto a website and record answers to recorded question prompts using a webcam. Employers will watch the interviews according to their own schedule and at their leisure. I know lots of large companies who have made the official move to video interviews this year. So you're going to want to look at the advising document on video interviewing. That's also included in your course reader. They'll give you some good tips on making sure you're acing those. Back to on-site, face-to-face interviews. You might run into panel interviews. This is really popular at companies where multiple stakeholders need to buy in on a single candidate. It helps facilitate the selection process as all the interviewers come together to make consensus quickly after meeting a candidate. You may ask how many people will be present if you intend to distribute materials like your resume. This will ensure that you're organized and prepared. Presentation interviews are becoming more common as well, although you probably won't run into it very often. This is where multiple candidates come in at the same time to vie for a few open slots, or maybe even just one position. These can take many forms, but essentially it is a huge time saver for companies and one where they can compare the competition quickly. In this situation, it needs to become clear that you stand out. So volunteer and be a leader when the opportunity arises. Remember, those most critical professional competencies currently in short demand that we identified in our previous class. So building effective teams, directing others. Presentation interviews allow those skills to come into play. So if you have long been that student who doesn't pull his weight in a group project, this is the time to step up and use your leadership skills. So what is an interview really? An interview is your chance to prove that you can succeed in an exact role and at a specific company. It's also your chance to convince company representatives that you belong on the team through the connection that you make in that 30 minutes or 60 minutes together. It's also the chance for you to provide the information that's needed for the hiring team to decide if this is a good fit. So you'll want to seize this opportunity by creating a good connection and providing proof that you can perform. If you can provide proof that you can succeed in a role, and the folks in the room feel a connection with you, you will likely get hired, or at least move on to the next round. It's really that simple. So first and foremost, relax and smile. Smiling is the only body gesture that means the same thing in all societies on Earth. I'm happy right now. This is ingrained in our lizard brains. A natural smile makes people comfortable. So relax, be yourself, and smile. Some of you might be thinking to yourself, yeah, duh, but I'm telling you that about 1/3 of interviewees do not smile in an interview room. You want to move this interview from a question and answer session to a real conversation. The goal of the hiring representatives is to bring on a new team member. So they are asking themselves in the interview, can I really see myself going to work with this person every day? Would I want to take this person on a vendor visit? It's important to make your personality shine in the interview room. This is definitely not to say that you should fake it or be someone that you aren't. In fact, you'll hear from the advice of our guest today that authenticity is one of the most important things that you need to bring into an interview room. So introverts, you should not be pretending that you're extroverts. That's false advertising and it really won't work. Plus, I think the business world can use a few more introverts. What I mean by this is switch the interview into a conversation. Make good eye contact and use their names when you speak to an individual. If they ask you a question that prompts a question in your mind, ask it. Do they say something about the company that intrigues you? Well, do more probing. If the opportunity to make a joke comes up and it's appropriate, well, and funny, take it if that's your style. The focus of the interview should be to provide proof that you can succeed in the role and in the company, but you should also enjoy yourself while you're in there. The interviewers will glean much from a candidate that is enjoying the conversation. You want to ask good questions and jot down your notes. There's an unspoken rule that if a recruiter asks, do you have any questions for me at the end of the interview, and there's a sound of crickets on the other end of the table, this just isn't going to work out. Passion for the job is important. So show it through the thoughtful questions that you bring to the table, and take notes on the important information that emerges in the interview. This shows that you value the information being shared. And definitely write down everyone's names when you get to the table. It is absolutely appropriate to bring a small journal or a padfolio with you so that you can take notes during your interview. But it's absolutely appropriate to bring something with you to write into an interview room. You want to provide substantial answers. Vague answers or answers that don't really provide an answer to the question can cut a connection off really quickly. So think about any lame date that you've been on where the conversation went flat. It's really hard to bring it back up from then. So think about the question and your best answer before you start talking, and avoid rambling by knowing what your point is. Providing proof that you can do the job. We've spoken about dress before. Remember that you have milliseconds to send the visual message that you belong in their setting. So dress not just for the role you're interviewing for, but the role that you hope to hold one day. You should look as sharp as those interviewing you at the very least. You'll want to definitely do your company research, and you're going to hear a lot about this from our guests today. This is where most interviews fail. Know the company values. Think of how you demonstrate them. What's the company mission as they describe it on their website? Is there a way to discuss how what the company cares about matches with what you care about? You'll want to break down that job description, analyze it closely, anticipate and prepare for any of those related questions. The job description tells you in no uncertain terms the skills and the experience that one needs for this role. Be ready to speak on how you are ready to fulfill the tasks on that job description. As you'll hear later from our guests, you may not be a perfect match, and that's going to be okay. Today we will be going over common interview questions, but you need to also be prepared to answer questions about your fields of interest. So look up interview questions in your specific fields of interest to get prepared for those. Just as important as professional skills are professional traits. There are clues about the characteristics of a successful employee in those job descriptions. What can you glean from reading that description? Well, you need to be highly organized, perhaps adaptive and creative. Read between the lines of the job description so you can anticipate the questions they will be asking you in regards to specific characteristics that you hold. You may want to bring notes or samples. If you can provide your fit through work samples, such as a financial report you've developed, marketing collateral that you've created, or an EEO analysis that you conducted, bring it if that's a requirement as described in the job description. If your proof isn't tangible, then seize this opportunity to verbally represent your value in a well-organized and crystal clear fashion. This is one of the main reasons I see students passed up for job interviews. They do not articulate themselves well by telling needy stories. They often give vague answers filled with buzzwords, hoping that they are coming off as informed. But recruiters don't buy it. They want people who are aware of their skills and the impact they have. So don't let vague interviews happen. Know yourself well, know your worth, and unpack your experiences. If you do not know your best accomplishments in life, how can you possibly convey your worth to another person? So once you know your best of me playlist, use your STAR method to compose your responses to an interview. So here it is again, the STAR technique that I keep bringing up. This is a way to frame answers to interview questions in an organized manner that will give the interviewer the most information about your past experience in a short amount of time. Like I said, first step, know your accomplishments. What are you proud of that might interest the recruiter? What times in your life challenged you most that can be shared in a professional setting? Think of at least 10 good stories to share. Then jot down 1 or 2 words in your interview portfolio for each story so you can glance down and recall your best stories to share. Some tips for using STAR: give a good amount of detail to paint a very clear picture at each step. Next, focus on you versus, say, a group or a team you're a part of, so you show accountability for your individual responsibility and contribution. Don't go back to the same job or experience as a source for STAR stories. Mix it up and diversify. And definitely don't reuse a previously shared story in the same interview. And finally, remember that if the result, the R, wasn't positive or doesn't place you in a great light, that is not a story for an interview. I want to make one final point before we get to our questions. Yes, it's important that you recognize that you are fortunate to get an interview, but interviews are absolutely a two-way street, and you want to make sure that you aren't making a bad choice when you sign the dotted line. So turn the tables and collect proof from the company to determine if they are a good fit for you. And here's some cues for you to pick up on. I'm going to do some digging around beforehand, use some of these sites to find out how these companies are doing. If possible, talk to a current or previous employee about the culture. Pay attention to the interview process. Does it feel chaotic or organized? Do people smile when they're walking through the hallways? Does your interviewer seem distracted or engaged? And also, show what you know. Demonstrating that you understand their culture will go a long way in impressing them, but also indicates that you're not one to be misled in any way. Okay, so now I want you to turn to the first page of your 20 Common Interview Questions worksheet and grab your pencil. What we're going to be doing is actually penciling in your responses to these common questions. I'll share some techniques on the best ways to prepare your responses. You're also going to be hearing, as we go along, from our guests about different questions that they like to ask and what they expect from your responses to help you write these, okay? So let's start with some introductory questions. While a typical job interview lasts 30 to 45 minutes, you only have the first 4 minutes or so to convince the interviewer that you're the best person for the job. So your first few questions need to focus on your ability to do the job that you're applying for, show your enthusiasm for this opportunity, and express your soft skills. So you want to be enthusiastic, not gushy, but embody energy and motivation. Let your body talk. Use good posture, but lean slightly towards the interviewer rather than away. Keep good eye contact. This communicates both your interest and your confidence. So set the best tone right off the bat and be prepared for this question. Tell me about yourself. A few pages before your worksheet, you're going to see 20 common interview questions and smart ways to respond. So that's what I'm referring to when I give you some of these strategies, okay? So when you're asked, tell me about yourself. This question might come in different forms, but it is the most often asked question in interviews and usually the first question. Have a short statement prepared that describes a little about your past, a lot about your present, and a little about your future that essentially answers the question, why are we sitting across the table and talking today? Be careful that it doesn't sound too rehearsed. Be excited about the opportunity and fully engaged. Limit your answer to relevance with the interview. Talk about the things you have done that relate to the position you're interviewing for and show strategy in your thinking that led you to apply for this position in the first place. This sets the tone to shift from a mundane question and answer session to an impactful dialogue. So go ahead and take a moment and write down on your worksheet how you would answer the question, tell me about yourself, in a professional interview. For all of these questions, let's suppose this is a first interview in an entry-level position in your field of interest. While you're writing, I want to give you a couple of insights. So in the interviewer's brain, they're thinking, why should I be excited to sit across the table from you right now? And so this answer really should show a lot of your interest in the employer and in this person who's taking the time to speak with you about the job. Question 2, why did you decide to attend UTC? And how did you choose this line of work? They are looking for people who are strategic and apply critical thinking to decisions. Have a good answer ready, showing passion for the field. Go ahead and write your answer out to question number 2. How would you answer that in an interview? In the interviewer's brain, she's wondering, does this person think through multiple options for the best choice or just pick an apparent choice? Does she demonstrate zeal for her academic studies? They're looking for passion here. Okay, question 3. Why did you leave your last job? Why are you looking to leave your job? Stay positive regardless of the circumstances. Don't refer to a major problem with management. Never speak ill of supervisors, coworkers, or the company. You'll hear the guests talk about that today as well. Keep smiling and talk about leaving for a hopeful, forward-looking reason. In their mind, they're wondering, are we interviewing another company's cast-off, or do we have a thoughtful, composed individual here who is primed to join us? And this leads us to one of the most important questions of an interview. What experience do you have in this field, or why should we hire you? The underlying question here is, have you done your research? Do you know what this job is about? Do you know what this company is about? So in the recruiter's mind, they're thinking, this is it. Has she asked herself these big questions? Can she prove her fit? Did she do their research on us? Does she know what it takes to succeed here? Does she have the skills to do it well? So as you think through this question, you want to speak about specifics that relate to the position for which you are applying. If you don't have specific experience, get as close as you can. It's critical that you prepare by unpacking your brain and know how to tie your experiences and skills to the position description. Okay, we're going to take a break here and hear from some of our guests today. I hope you'll enjoy them. Okay, first let's hear from our guests about things to do before you get to the interview. So things like getting your resume ready, doing your research. So do you expect everyone to have a resume with them when they come into an interview?
I do. I always have one printed just in case, but I think it's a nice show if they come prepared with a resume.
And I definitely prefer for them to have a resume, especially because at Mohawk we do a lot of panel interviews, especially for our full-time roles. And so we'll have candidates that are meeting with several different people in one interview. And so for them to be able to, I provide resumes for all of those hiring managers, whether they have it and print it off and bring it with them is something different. Right. So you being the one prepared is always the best option.
So is it appropriate for them to ask in setting up an interview, how many resumes should I bring with me to this appointment?
For sure.
Yeah, all right, excellent. Okay, good.
I think the biggest piece of advice I can give someone is do your research. Do your research on the company, do your research on the position. Make sure you have a general understanding of what the company does. And one thing I always recommend to people too is if you apply to a job, copy and paste that job description into a Word document and save it to your computer. So that way, when you're about to go in for the interview, you can actually go back and review it, because by the time that you go into the interview, the posting might have come down. So you might not be able to see it. So I recommend, copy and paste it, save it to your computer before you go into the interview, read it a couple of times, make sure you know what they're looking for, and make sure you do your research on the company too.
Yeah, definitely know the role that you're applying for. Sometimes you get on the phone with candidates and they're like, which application was this?
Yeah.
I
don't know. I can't really see your files.
Yeah. So know what role you're discussing at that point in time with the recruiter. Definitely read over the job description. Be prepared to speak to why you're interested in the role and why you feel like you're a good fit for that role.
Okay. So when you say research the company, tell me exactly what you mean by that. What do you expect me to look at before I come and talk to you?
Yeah, I expect you to at least go on the website and know a little bit about what we do. For Unum, I expect you to at least know that we're in the insurance industry. If you get a little confused on what we actually do in the industry, I understand that it's a confusing business, but I at least expect someone to go on the website, maybe look at where we're located, look at how long we've been around, how many people we reach, just kind of get a general idea of what the business does.
And I would just to add to that, Lauren, I think one thing that I've really noticed too is, companies have social media sites. And so check out their social media sites, like see what they're talking about on their LinkedIn or on their Twitter page, Facebook. I definitely think that shows to a recruiter your level of interest in the company.
Definitely. And sorry, I was just going to add to that. And one thing that I would recommend when you're doing the research is I think a good goal is to find one thing about the company that makes you really excited about them, whether that's their community involvement, their inclusion and diversity, their different, resource groups. Find one thing that you can talk about in an interview that makes you really excited about the company.
You've heard me talk a lot about STAR, but let's hear from our guests about how they expect you to present your experiences and the stories.
So a behavioral-based interview is really what we're saying is past actions predict future actions, or future results. So we're looking at specific examples from past positions or past, experience in different activities or leadership roles, how you handled those situations, and what the outcome was. So one thing that I recommend is looking into the STAR technique, so situation, task, action, result. Mm-hmm. So when we ask you those behavioral-based questions, it'll typically be something like, tell me about a time you made a mistake and how you overcame that mistake. What was the result? So we're looking for you to give us the situation, give us the context. How did you make that mistake? Give us a task. What did you do? Or what was your plan to overcome that mistake? What did you actually do? What was the action? And what was the result? So how did you actually overcome it? That's really what we're looking for when we ask about those. But really, it's just focused on specific examples and looking for ways that you've handled situations in the past.
Brady's the same expectations?
I do. And I just to add something to be mindful of is you don't want to take 15 minutes to answer one question. So you make sure that you're giving enough context so that the example makes sense, but you also don't want to ramble on and on and on and overshare. Mm-hmm. So it takes practice, but yes, absolutely.
I'm expecting that STAR method, right? And I'm also expecting something more business related. So can you tell me in a short amount of time, right? Like some people can't tell a short story. Can you tell me what happened, what you had to do to fix it, and what the end result was, basically?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And in a short amount, are you rambling when you're telling the story? Keep it practice. Yeah. Have a couple of situations in mind. I think that was some of the best interview advice that I was ever given was go ahead and pick a couple of those situations and have them in mind. And based on what company you're interviewing for, pick a couple of those.
So CJ and Peyton, do you also rely on the STAR method when you're collecting feedback through interview responses? Do you expect that type of storytelling element?
It's always nice to hear. I don't know if I expect it out of everyone because, especially for some of the more entry-level positions, one of my favorite questions to ask is, tell me about a time when you learned from a mistake on the job. And sometimes I'll get, I'll have to drag it out of them. It's, oh, well, I forgot to do this. And I'm like, so then what happened?
Yeah.
Well, then this. I was like, so what was the end result?
Right. You pull them through.
Yeah.
And I think I tend to put it in that format. I'll phrase it with, tell me what the scenario was, things that you did, and what the outcome and resolution was. I think that I sort of bake it into the question. Maybe I shouldn't do that.
Just to test them. I like that.
Yeah, just to test them.
Yeah.
And make it too easy.
Next, let's hear from our guest about some of the initial questions that they will ask to get the conversation going. And then we'll move right into some of their favorite questions that they ask. They give some advice, too, about how they expect people to answer those questions. How do you like to start the interview? What question do you like to begin with? How about you,
I
Catherine?
really love to jump in with, tell me a little bit about yourself. And the reason that I ask this is because I want to know if a candidate can walk me succinctly through their resume without getting overly personal.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to just, after asking how their day is, what's going on and how they're doing, I really like to just start with a resume walkthrough. And I say, I have the resume right in front of me, but I would really like to hear just sort of your own take on your work experience. Feel free to really spend time on the areas you feel that you really want to dig deep in. Mm-hmm. I'm always interested to see where they take it.
I ask them why they picked the specific major that they have. Why are they interested in this particular topic?
Catherine, how do you expect them to answer that question?
I want them to be able to give a logical explanation. I don't want them to say, well, I just, I thought it would be interesting. So I'm passionate about business analytics because I enjoy helping companies improve on X, Y, and Z. This is an area really for a personal brand statement, I feel like. They can definitely say, oh, I'm really passionate about helping people find or helping people do this. So give me something more than, my parents thought it would be a good idea.
Right. Okay, cool. And CJ, you were talking about how your next question would be, why did you apply for this position? That's a loaded question. What do you expect them to be ready to, how do you want them to be ready to respond?
Well, generally, I would love to hear, I was reading the job description and I saw X, Y, or Z. Or I've heard a lot of great things about your company. These are a few. I always like it when people do their homework on a company before walking into an interview. Instead of just, well, I was on LinkedIn, there's an easy apply button, so I figured why not?
Right.
Something along those lines.
Okay, great. So Catherine and Peyton, I'll open that to you too. So when someone applies, so when someone comes in, do you always ask them why you applied for this job, why your company, what do you know about our firm, those types of questions? When a candidate is not prepared, what is your tendency?
They're no longer a candidate. If I ask you why Mohawk and you can't tell me and you haven't done any research on my company and you don't even know what we do, like I've had candidates that are like, oh, I think you do carpet, right? Well, actually, we are the largest flooring manufacturer in the world. Do your homework. Yeah. You're not a candidate anymore.
Right.
Yeah, no, very similarly, I think sometimes candidates will really just try to, I guess, get their way through that question and they'll say, I really wasn't able to find any information online. Red flag. Sometimes I'll get a little bit sassy and say, oh, if you go to bellhop.com, you'll come across our website. It just definitely is not a good look when someone doesn't put in the time to have an understanding of the industry, the company, especially if the company has a strong mission and vision. or values that matter, if you don't have an understanding of what those are, you're no longer a candidate.
Okay.
I think for me, it's just really, honestly, and I know Bree and I have talked about this a lot too together. The first question we're going to ask you is tell us, or what do you know about Unum, or have you heard of Unum? And if you say no, I don't know what you do, I don't know what it is, I'm already like, okay,
Wrapping it.
you know, that's already a red flag for me. Also, I think just not really showing an interest. If you kind of act like you're, I can't really think of another way to say this, but if you kind of act like you're doing us a favor by interviewing with us, uh, that just shows me that maybe you're not going to be a long-term employee because this isn't really the position for you. So I think just showing interest, doing your research, and when we do a lot of behavioral-based interviewing, so making sure that you're giving us those examples and talking about specifics.
Okay.
And also, don't talk about how you got, fired for cussing out a customer on the floor or anything like that.
Right.
Tell me about a time when you failed, right? I want to know that you can rise above and not fall apart. And tell me about a time when you had to deal with conflict on a team. I want to make sure that I can find a good team member and someone that I actually want to work with. And
Yeah, I would say I do tend to ask very similar questions around customer experiences. When you dealt with a difficult customer, can you walk me through that scenario, what the outcome was, especially if it's a customer-oriented position. I think when somebody mentions, if I ask why they're looking for a career shift or a new opportunity at this time, I definitely listen to the way that they talk about a previous employer, and if they are able to take ownership for maybe something that didn't go well in a previous role with a previous company, or if they are playing the victim and putting blame on, well, my manager was just really challenging, or they didn't see my potential and are a bit whiny. I think that those tend to be red flags with a candidate and how they are going to work with the team.
What do you expect from a response to that question? And I know that you have already mentioned that you want to make sure that they can overcome and learn. Is there anything that's out of bounds for that type of response?
I had a candidate want to start talking about a romantic relationship as a time when he failed. Keep in mind, this is a business interview, so I personally don't care about your personal life. Sorry if that sounds rude. It's fun when a candidate in like the tell me a little bit about yourself is like, oh, and I'm also passionate about skiing or something dumb like that, but they're not expanding on that. So leave your personal stuff to the side. I want to know, is there a time when you failed in a class project? Is there a time when you failed at work? And part of the reason that I'm asking that is because I want to know what your philosophy on failure is. We at Mohawk are innovative. We like trying new things. And I don't want a candidate who's going to be so afraid of failure that they can't step outside the box and see if they can problem solve in a new and different way.
Does the idea of interviewing make you nervous? I think that's true for everybody. Let's hear from our recruiters about how we can get over being nervous in an interview. So Catherine brought up the topic of nervousness, and obviously that's one of the biggest issues that my students are dealing with. Is I feel them, because you feel like part of your self-worth is wrapped up on whether or not you're getting good job offers after you're done with graduation. Just like when you get into a good school, you feel like, okay, well, I've accomplished something here. What advice do you have to help students get over their nervousness? Now, I think Catherine hit on the head, just thinking about interviews as, you have to come in well prepared, obviously, but thinking of it as a conversation between two individuals trying to figure out if this is a good fit for each other. What other types of advice do you have for students who are feeling like a lot of anxiety around the idea of interviewing?
Essentially, you are just having a conversation, but if you're going into this thing nervous, you're not going to let all of you actually come out in the interview. There could be something that doesn't come out that that recruiter would have really loved to see, or what makes you you?
Mm. Okay, so be your true authentic self.
100%.
And I think that also goes with Catherine's earlier suggestion, is to know your stories and know the stories that you want to bring to the table. That might help the conversation go a little bit easier. Okay.
Yeah, I definitely say be prepared. So do your research on the company, have your questions ahead of time that you're looking to ask. So those things already are not going to be something that you're nervous about because you have prepared to some extent. I encourage the candidates to also be authentic. They are interviewing us as well. They're interviewing the company. And I say, hey, you have weight in this conversation. You get to determine if this is a good fit for you. It's not always about getting the offer or getting the job. It's about finding the right fit. So I think that if people can be authentic throughout, that's really important.
Can you give me a question? So I'll take each of you in turn. Can you give me a question that your company that often asks that tends to stump your candidates, and how people can better prepare to answer that question?
One of the questions that I'll ask that stumps candidates a lot is, tell me about a leadership experience you've had or a time where you exhibited leadership. I think a lot of times people think, specifically college students, that if you didn't hold a title, then you don't have any leadership experience. And so I've had candidates where I'll look at their resume and be like, oh, I need to dig into this time because they definitely did leadership stuff. But then I'll ask them, tell me about a time when you experienced leadership, and they won't be able to answer the question. And so being able to lead people isn't always necessarily about holding that title of chairman for your sorority or, manager at McDonald's or whatever. It can be, well, we had a group project and everyone was kind of faltering on what to do. And so I kind of just helped take charge a little bit, or, I really had to lead this team of volunteers. It can be anything. It's leadership is exhibiting influence over others. It's not necessarily about position.
I do tend to ask when they're applying if they're looking for a certain work environment or company culture that they feel really helps them to be successful, or what type of environment they're looking for. And I don't think this is an area that many candidates have thought through. So I think it is nice to be mindful about the setting, team. Are you more of an individual performer? Do you like working collaboratively with a team? Do you like having the flexible work hours? Do you like 9 to 5? I think really thinking through what someone is looking for in a role is an important thing to know going into an interview. And it gives me a lot of information. If someone is like, I love rigid work environments, I like rules, I'm all about punctuality and certain things, if they're being authentic, I can say like, okay, it might not be the best fit for the startup company that I'm currently recruiting for. So I think that if somebody walks me through what they're looking for, it actually gives me a lot of information with whether or not they'd be happy on our team.
Right. When you have a candidate who's faced with an interview question and they seem stumped, what advice do you have for candidates who feel like they're facing a question that they have no good answer for?
That's a good one. They get real quiet. Their face starts getting red. They're like, I don't know. And I'm like, just take a minute. Let's go on to another one. I'll come back to that here in a minute. And I may ask 2 more questions and then maybe rephrase that question that was stumping them and see where they go from there.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with CJ. I think that I encourage candidates to be thoughtful with their responses. It's okay to acknowledge like, wow, that's a tough question, or I really want to come up with the right scenario for this. Can I think about it for a moment? I think that it's okay to ask for time to process. I would appreciate that more than the response that's, top of mind in that moment. I think that it's okay to say that's a tough question. I would like to think on that one.
Yeah, taking the time to actually say, I need to think about it, for sure. I would rather you say that than just start talking in circles, right? Don't waste my time. So I'd also say too, for a lot of the most of the positions I recruit for are internships and entry level positions. And so I don't expect you to know everything. So don't feel like you have to come into this interview and if you're asked a technical question, if you don't know the answer to it, you're automatically not going to go through. I'm looking for people who are willing to learn. So I think that's something that's really important to remember as you're just starting out. A lot of these positions will say entry level and then have 2 to 5 years of experience on there. Don't be discouraged. If you exhibit a willingness to learn, that's a great question. I'm not sure that I know the answer. What are your thoughts on it? But I'd really love to learn more. I'd really love to learn about that. It's always having a humble spirit is so important.
I talked with our guests about the types of characteristics that good interviewers display when they're in their interview sessions. So let's hear from them about the characteristics they think are really important to interviewing well. What are some of the characteristics that candidates display in their interviewing technique or in their answers that attracts you as a recruiter?
First and foremost, be confident in your response. Don't give a response and then make it sound like at the end you're asking if that's what I'm looking for. Be confident, say what's on your mind. Again, just be that authentic, be yourself.
Authenticity is really the main quality that I'm looking for. Energy, interest. I would much rather somebody be interested in the company, in the position, than for them to be interesting, where they're speaking about, I traveled to 18 countries the past 5 years and I'm doing this, that, and the other. Like, that's great. You seem to be a traveled person, but are you interested at all in this position or this company? So I think that being interested is a really strong quality to have. And then being confident in your strengths. I think a lot of candidates tend to focus on what they don't have on their resume. So they'll say, I don't have, 2 years of work experience, or they focus on what's missing rather than the strengths that they do have. So I really encourage candidates to say, you're great at something, find those 3 things that you're really skilled at, and really just keep honing in on those strengths during the interview. We all have things that we could develop in as professionals, but don't let that be the star of the show during your conversation.
Love it. That's great. Okay, let's keep talking about these common interview questions. So going back to our worksheet in your course reader, let's get to question number 5. What would coworkers or former employers say about you? What's going through the employer's brain here is that they're trying to figure out what you think are the important attributes for this job. So first of all, being aware of what other people think about your competencies is important, but then you also want to, of course, bring everything back to this specific situation. So this job, this company. So you want to speak to the attributes that are going to be important specifically for this job and the values and the characteristics that are important to that company. So you'll see, again, on the 20 common interview questions and smart ways to respond, just a few pages before, immediately before the worksheet, you're going to see this advice for question number 5. Be prepared with a quote or 2. Either a specific statement or a paraphrase will work. So for instance, Jamal Clark, a colleague at the ABC company, said I was the hardest worker he'd ever known. Obviously, if a hard work ethic is important to this position, that's a great thing to share. It's as powerful as Jamal saying it himself. So really do think about the people who would be talking about you when you're answering this question. If you have trouble answering this question, go ahead and ask former colleagues and professional friends for their opinions about you. So please take a moment and write down your answer to question number 5 in your worksheet. Question number 6 is not one that we can spend a lot of time on today because obviously you'll need to do the research for each and every organization that you interview with. But hopefully with the feedback that you've received from these recruiters today, you recognize how incredibly important this specific question is. Okay, so you'll see from the advising sheet on this question This is the heart of the interview and the primary reason to do research on the organization beforehand. A good response is premeditated and should be based on the research you have done on the organization, plus your thorough understanding of the specific position. Find out where the company has been and where it's going. Who are their major players? Can you get behind their mission? Visit their About Us web pages, search online about current events involving the company, and look on Glassdoor.com to get the scoop on positive things their employees are saying. Know that every job description is specific, so you have to know it very well. Speak to the evidence that you can perform in that job. Mention how this role sets you up for your long-term goals as well. A flat answer here may very well end the interview, so be prepared. And we've heard from our recruiters that that's absolutely true. In their brains, they are really seeing if this is a waste of time or not. As Lauren mentioned, if this question is not answered well, they're pretty much wrapping it up. We're going to skip question 7 for now. We're going to be hearing from the recruiters specifically about the topic of salary next class session. In the meantime, what I want to urge you to do is to think about the kind of salary that you need. Later on in this course, we're going to be talking about budget, talking about negotiation, and doing the research to find out what the good range for your areas of interest and your education level and your experience level is going to be. But for right now, just start considering the question of salary. Question number 8. We heard this from the recruiters a lot. This is one of their favorites. Tell me about a time when you failed. It might be tell me about a time when you made a mistake, things of that nature. Going back to our advising document, we read, no one wins all the time, so how do you deal with failure? Do you sweep it under the rug? Do you stop trying? Do you avoid attempting anything where failure might happen again? Of course not. You see failure as a challenge or a step in the process towards success or a lesson well learned. So have a good star story ready. In their mind, they're looking for someone who talks about themselves with humility and can learn from experience. Are they taking ownership of their mistakes? Are they instead maybe placing blame on others? Is she willing to work through ambiguity and take risks when they are worth it? Remember when we talked about professional competencies, the idea of dealing with ambiguity is something that's really important to employers. So have a good story ready that ends with a good R. So again, that R in STAR stands for result. So what was the outcome of the story, and to make sure that you're presenting it in a way that puts you in a good light. So go ahead and pause here and answer this question. It may take you a few moments. Question number 9. Tell me about a time when you helped a team focus and led them to success. It may not be this exact question, but you're going to expect a teamwork-based question. You are, of course, a team player, right? Be sure to have some examples ready. Specific stories that show that you often perform for the good of the team rather than for personal success. Don't brag, just say this is in a matter-of-fact tone. That's a key point. The whole point to this question is making sure that you see yourself as a collaborative partner rather than someone who is outside of the team. Use that STAR method to stay focused and provide a thorough reply. In their brain, they're looking for people who are thinking of holistic success versus personal accomplishments. People who can do that now will be our leader in a few years. Go ahead and pause here and think of a few instances where you did help a team get focused, led them to success. In other words, you really proved yourself to be a team player. Question 10, are you applying for other jobs? This one's actually pretty easy. You want to be honest and don't spend a lot of time in this area. Keep the focus on this job and what you can do for this organization. Anything else is a distraction. What's going through their mind is how excited is this person to be here today? What is her time frame for employment? So there's obviously some logistical issues that they are trying to figure out when they ask this question. And then also, will offering her a position get complicated? I will very rarely give you the answers to interview questions, but this is one of these situations where I feel like I can tell you that there are two good answers here. One is either, no, this is the position I'm really excited about and I want to see where this takes me. Or, yes, I'm looking at other positions, but this is the position I'm most excited about and I'm looking forward to finding out where it takes me. This one should just take a quick pause to write those ideas down in your worksheet. Okay, well that will wrap up this class session. Next week we're also going to be talking about the interview with the same guests, and we will be continuing in our course reader. to think about these common interview questions and smart ways to answer them. You do have some homework for the week. You are going to be doing some reading in What Color is Your Parachute this week. That is going to be Chapter 9. It is due on the 28th. There's no submission for reading. However, we're going to be having a quiz coming up pretty soon, so I want to make sure that you're on top of that. The other assignment for this class is to submit your final resume, and I want to just quickly note a few things about this. This is not due until March 7th. So I want to make sure that you are considering the advice from your resume review before you submit this, okay? So please don't submit something that is in a draft phase. I want to see the very final product, making sure that it's something that you can be proud of and frankly something that you're ready to send out to employers. That is not due until March 7th, so please take your time with it. I would very much like to see the end result. Thank you so much for watching, and please make sure that you're looking at Canvas for the assignments for this week.